box was already open when Eloise looked down at it. Small, black velvet. And inside, catching the candlelight of the Fairmont ballroom, a necklace she recognized immediately. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because she had signed off on the design herself 18 months ago in a boardroom on the 32nd floor of a building with her name on the lease. She said nothing. Around her, 47 guests held their breath. Her husband, Colton Ashby, 38-year-old senior partner at Radcliffe & Brennan Law, was smiling the way he always smiled at events like this. Wide, performative, the kind of smile that was really meant for the room and not for her. His father, Gerald Ashby, 67 years old and retired but never quiet about it, stood to Colton's left with his chest out and his glass raised. "To my daughter-in-law," Gerald said, "on her 36th birthday. May she finally understand what a lucky woman she is." A few people laughed, the kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh. Eloise Ashby, born Eloise Marchand, 36-year-old founder and silent CEO of Harbour & Stone, one of Canada's most quietly powerful luxury lifestyle companies, closed the box gently and set it on the table in front of her. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even. It always was. What most people in that ballroom did not know, what Colton himself had never fully understood in 9 years of marriage, was that Eloise had not been sitting still. She had been building something. Piece by piece, quietly, the way you build things when you know no one is watching, because no one ever thinks to watch you. She had met Colton when she was 27, still working under a pseudonym for an interior design firm in Vancouver. He was brilliant and charming, and he had a way of making you feel like the only person in a room full of people, which she would later come to understand was a skill he practiced often and indiscriminately. They married quickly. She had wanted children. He had wanted a partner who looked good at firm dinners and didn't ask too many questions about his schedule. For a while she had been that, but Eloise had never been only that. Harbour & Stone began as a side project. A small online boutique selling Canadian-made homewares and hand-finished jewelry sourced from artisans in Nova Scotia, Quebec, BC. She kept her name off the public filings. She had her reasons, some of them practical, some of them the kind you don't examine too closely until later. What mattered was that the company grew. Then it kept growing. Then it became something that people in certain rooms talked about with reverence, the way they talk about companies that seem to appear fully formed, as if no one had to sacrifice anything to build them. By the time Eloise turned 34, Harbour & Stone was valued at just under $2 billion. Gerald Ashby, who golfed with half of Bay Street and considered himself a reliable compass for what was worth knowing, had mentioned the company at dinner no fewer than 12 times in the past year alone. He was particularly fond of their jewelry line, the Cairn collection. He had bought pieces for his second wife, for his secretary, for a cousin's daughter getting married in Kelowna. He told anyone who would listen that the company was a symbol of what Canadian luxury could be, when it wasn't trying to be European. He had no idea his daughter-in-law had built it from her kitchen table. Eloise had found out about Colton's affair in November, not through a text message or a lipstick on a collar. She was not that kind of story. She found out through a charge on a joint account that Colton had forgotten to separate, a hotel in Whistler, the weekend he had told her he was in Calgary for a client. She had cross-referenced the hotel dates with his mileage claim. Then she had hired someone to confirm what she already suspected. The report came back in February. 8 pages. Photographs. A name. Sloan Whitfield, 29, junior associate at a competing firm. The relationship had been ongoing for 14 months. Eloise read the report once, set it on her desk, and went back to work. She told no one, not her best friend Dominique, not her sister Ray, who lived in Halifax and would have driven straight to Vancouver to burn something down. She sat with it alone, the way she had sat with most of the significant things in her life, quietly, and with the full weight of what she knew pressing into her. She had a plan. She just needed the right moment. The birthday dinner had been Colton's idea, which she had found interesting. 40 guests, the Fairmont Ballroom, a seated dinner with a jazz quartet. He had presented it to her in March, over breakfast, with the energy of a man who had recently done something wrong and was trying to correct the balance without admitting what it was. She had said yes. She had started making her own preparations. The necklace was from the Cairn Collection's newest release, the one that had not yet gone public. The duskline pendant, 18-karat white gold, a hand-cut labradorite drop, a chain so fine it looked like water. Eloise knew the weight of it exactly. She had held the prototype in her own hands. It was not available for purchase. It would not be available until the fall launch. There were 11 samples in existence. 9 were in the Harbour & Stone head office. 1 was with the photographer who had shot the campaign last month, and 1. The one that had gone missing from the office 3 weeks ago, flagged in an inventory email Eloise had personally received and quietly held aside, was now sitting in a velvet box on the table in front of her at the Fairmont, Vancouver. Her head of security, a steady and careful man named Paul Tremblay, who had worked with her for 6 years, was already in the building. He had been there since 7. 2 of her senior staff were seated at different tables, invited as guests. No one had announced who they were. Eloise's lawyer, Fiona Dorr of Dorr and Kowalski, was parked in a car half a block away with a document package prepared and ready. The plan had been in motion for 3 months. She had simply been waiting for Colton to hand her the opening himself. The dinner continued. The jazz quartet moved through a quiet Miles Davis standard. Gerald refilled his glass and told the man beside him about a deal he had almost been part of in 1987. Colton worked the room with the ease of someone who had been working rooms his entire adult life, touching people on the arm when he spoke, laughing with his whole body. Sloane Whitfield was not at the dinner. Eloise had confirmed this early in the planning. She had no interest in making this about another woman. When the dessert plates were being cleared, Colton stood and tapped his glass again. "I want to say a few words," he said. "About my wife." He was good at this. She had always given him that. He spoke about when they met, about her quiet strength, about how she held everything together without ever needing acknowledgement. He said she was the kind of woman you didn't fully appreciate until you stopped to look. A few of the women at the table had tears in their eyes. Eloise watched him. She thought about the hotel in Whistler, the 8 pages, the 14 months. She thought about the duskline pendant, which had been removed from a locked cabinet in her own building, using a keycard that had been reported lost by Colton's personal assistant. An assistant Colton had hired without telling her, who had building access through a contractor arrangement Eloise had approved without realizing the name on the paperwork was connected to Colton personally. She thought about how long she had watched people underestimate the cost of underestimating her. When he finished speaking, the room applauded. Eloise stood. "Thank you," she said. "I'd like to say something too, if that's all right." Colton smiled and gestured grandly. "Of course. The necklace is beautiful," she said, looking at the box. "I'd love to have it appraised before I wear it. Jewelry like this, it should be authenticated. I'd feel more comfortable knowing its provenance." She paused. "I happen to have someone here who could do that tonight if no one objects." The smile on Colton's face did not disappear immediately. It took a moment, like a light that flickers before it goes out. "Elors," he said, and his voice had a warning in it, the kind she had heard many times. "That's not really necessary." "I think it is," she said. She was still smiling. She was always smiling at events like this. "Paul." Paul Tremblay stepped forward from near the wall where he had been standing, unremarkable, unnoticed. He was carrying a small case. Beside him was a woman Eloise's guest now began to recognize, Dr. Helene Fortier, one of Canada's most cited experts in luxury goods authentication, frequently retained by the RCMP and by private insurers from Halifax to Victoria. Gerald Ashby set down his glass. Dr. Fortier examined the necklace at a small side table that had been quietly cleared by the event staff. Staff that Eloise had coordinated with personally 3 weeks in advance. It took 11 minutes. The room, by the 4th minute, had gone the particular kind of quiet that happens when people understand something significant is unfolding but are not yet certain what it is. At 11 minutes, Dr. Fortier set down her loupe and turned to Eloise. "This piece," she said, with the measured cadence of someone who has given difficult testimony before, "is item 7 of 11 from an unreleased collection. It is the physical property of a company called Harbour & Stone Incorporated. It was reported as a missing asset to your office on the 14th of this month." She paused. "It was not for sale. It was not gifted. Under current inventory records, its whereabouts were listed as unknown." No one at the table moved. Gerald Ashby said, very slowly, "I'm sorry, Harbour & Stone?" Eloise turned to look at him. "Gerald," she said, "I believe you've mentioned that company to me at least a dozen times. You gave your wife a piece from the Cairn collection last Christmas. You called it the best Canadian brand you'd encountered in 30 years. She kept her voice warm. "I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I started it in my kitchen in 2013. It's mine." The silence that followed was different from the one before it. It was the silence of understanding arriving. Gerald stared at her, then at Colton, then back at her. Colton had not spoken in several minutes. His face had passed through several colors and settled somewhere between ash and fury. "What is this?" he said. "It was not a question. It's my birthday," Eloise said simply. "You asked me to celebrate. I thought we should celebrate honestly." Fiona Dorr entered the ballroom at precisely that moment. Eloise had texted her 3 minutes into Dr. Fortier's examination. She was a small woman in her late 50s who wore the expression of someone who had seen every possible version of this kind of evening and found none of them surprising. She carried an envelope which she set on the table in front of Colton. "Separation agreement," Eloise said. "Prepared by my counsel, reviewed by a second firm, and notarized. I'm not asking for a scene, Colton. I'm asking for a signature, when you're ready. Tonight or in the morning, I'll leave that to you. Colton looked at the envelope, then at Eloise, then at the 40-some guests seated around them, some of whom were already on their phones. You planned all of this, he said. I did, she said. You've been planning this for months. 3 months, she said. Give or take. You didn't have to do this here. Eloise looked at him for a long moment. She thought about a version of herself who would have done it privately, quietly, who would have handed him the papers in their kitchen and asked him to be decent about it, and trusted that he would be. She knew that version of herself well. She had been her for a long time. You stole something from my company, she said, to give it to me as a gift in front of my friends on my birthday. You built the scene, Colton. I just made sure it had a proper ending. She picked up her champagne. She did not toast anything. She simply drank it. Gerald Ashby left before the dessert was fully cleared. He said nothing to Eloise on his way out. No apology, no confrontation, nothing. Just the sound of a chair being pushed back and footsteps crossing marble. She had not expected one. Some of Eloise's guests came to her before they left. Dominique, who had known her since university, who had not known about any of this until that very moment, came and stood beside her and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "You absolute force of nature." Eloise laughed. It was the first real laugh of the evening. Ray called from Halifax at 11:30, which meant someone had already texted her. Eloise let it go to voicemail and texted back. "I'm fine. I'll call you tomorrow, I promise." She stayed until the last guests left. She thanked the staff. She tipped the quartet generously and made sure the event coordinator had everything she needed. Then she walked out of the Fairmont and stood on Georgia Street for a moment in the cool Vancouver night, with the city doing what cities do. Going on, indifferent, bright, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was standing on ground that was entirely her own. She had not wanted it to come to this. She had spent a long time wishing it wouldn't. That was the part no one would see in the photographs taken tonight, the part that wouldn't make it into whatever version of events circulated by Monday morning. The grief of it. The particular grief of watching someone who had been given so much of you use it carelessly and choosing, finally, to take yourself back. She did not hate Colton. She had passed through hate and come out somewhere quieter on the other side. She had built something that lasted. That was more than most people managed. She walked to her car. She drove home alone, and when she got there she made tea and sat in the kitchen where Harbour and Stone had begun and let herself be exactly where she was. That was enough. For that night, it was more than enough.